Let me get started with who we are at the Southern Gas Association. We're a non-profit trade organization headquartered in Dallas, Texas. We represent 160 natural gas companies. Our membership also includes associate members who provide services from environmental and engineering services all the way down to pipes, valves, and fittings and construction. We have over 500 member volunteers that help us manage about 52 sections and interest groups. Those interest groups focus on best practices, benchmarking, training, education, and regulatory compliance. We don't do advocacy work. We leave that up to the American Gas Association, who really takes the lead for the local distribution companies, the LDCs, and INGA, who takes the lead for the transmission companies. We provide about 60 live conferences and events a year, roundtables, and a number of virtual events. Our footprint, when we say Southern Gas Association, it's grown over those 106 years to really encompass coast to coast. Our membership includes producers. We have midstream, processing, treating, LNG, Cheniere Energy is a member, all the way down through all the major transmission companies, through LDCs and power producers. So we cover the span. Mike Grubb, our president, has given me the opportunity to be here today to represent the SGA. My comments are really a formulation and kind of compilation of all of the information I've gathered for our executive group over the last probably 3 months. So with that, I look at this from the eyes also of a producer, a royalty owner, a consumer, and a member of the staff at SGA. So with that, I'll get through, we're going to cover a lot of material. As my dad said, you've been involved in a lot of activity over your career. I've run E&P divisions all the way to running the gas distribution ops. He loves to say you're a mile wide and a foot deep. And I said, Dad, on average, a foot deep, but we can float some boats. So we're going to get into a little detail here. I want to take you back to 2010. We talked about supply yesterday. The Eagle Ford was a very, very small piece of our overall supply. The Marcellus was beginning to grow. It represented the Rockies, and many of you may remember we had a very large amount of gas in the Rockies. In 2009, we finished the Rockies Express to bring about 2 billion cubic feet a day from the west here into the Chicago, into the eastern markets. It advanced that to next year. We're 6 weeks away. Here's what the lineup looks like going into next year. The Marcellus has grown dramatically. We've seen declines in the Rockies. We've seen declines in the Haynesville and also the Gulf of Mexico. The Eagle Ford continues to grow, and the Marcellus grows a great deal, pretty stable in the Barnett. Flip this forward to, and I might add, I checked my facts yesterday with Bentech Energy, and the Marcellus currently at the end of August had 1,968 wells that were drilled and awaiting completion. So they were awaiting market connections or materials or services. So kind of teeing up, looking at 2020. Marcellus is actually, I love the image of the Bentech folks. They call it the beast of the East, and certainly is. It becomes over 30% of our supply domestically. The Rockies continue to decline, Anadarko declines, Barnett, Haynesville yet to kick in. We continue to see growth in the Eagle Ford, the Permian, as well as some increase in production in the Gulf of Mexico. So with that, we have really set the table for, I think, some things that we need to consider as we look at barriers and drivers. Clearly, the traditional system, if you look at how our logistical system was set up, it was set up to take gas from the areas that we knew and we produced in the 30s, 40s, and 50s all along the coast up through Texas. Those pipelines were the old traditional pipes. They were the Transcos, the Columbia Gulfs, the Panhandle Easterns, the Texas Gas, all those pipelines, Texas Eastern, they were all put together to take gas up these major corridors to population centers. Now we've got a situation where we'll be exporting gas. Actually, in the next 2 years, it's estimated that we'll start exporting gas from the Marcellus and Utica. Also, Canadian gas, and that's been coming down since the Alaska Natural Gas Transportation System was thought of back in the 70s. Northern Border was built here to bring gas into Chicago, and the western leg, the dog leg, was built to bring gas into California. Rockies gas is not going east. It's going to go west, has to find a way out. The gas from the traditional Gulf Coast isn't coming up in great quantities into this area. It's going to continue to serve the Piedmont, and Florida is a continuing growing market. Eagle Ford is probably looking at an exit to the south into Mexico, and the Permian looks to be back to the old days of Transwestern and El Paso, if any of you remember those days. The challenge also that we see is in the Northeast, we've got all the logistical issues that the pipeline industry is dealing with, and you may have heard of they're repurposing pipes to move gas from the north to the south. They're also converting pipelines to transport natural gas liquids out of the area. Also, we've got the issues that we talked about yesterday, and I think Doug did a great job talking about what SWN's up to with dealing with the local issues. I mean, when you think about the logistics that are going to have to be built for just the natural gas and the crude, condensate, and the NGLs, you've got pipelines, you've got gathering, you've got treating, you've got processing units, you've got fractionation that's going to have to be built, you've got storage that has to be built. Beyond that, you've got big transmission changes. You've got the changes of turning stations around, compression. One of our members indicated that they're trying to complete their leg into the Brooklyn area as a good example of the NIMBY. National Grid needs additional capacity in the Manhattan and Brooklyn area. They're working on the project for 7 years now. The permitting process, they are very close to getting permitting, so it'll be over a 7-year project to get that build done. If we look at production, we are very close to getting to the point where we're going to need to export gas. We've got this demand slice here. Kind of interesting to look back and look at EIA, where we are today. Back in 2005, everyone thought we were going to need close to 20 Bs of import. In 2007, 2008, 10, 13, 14, we've become a net exporter. And we have a necessity to get this done. One of our members, Cheniere Energy, has the, I think at this point at Sabine Pass, is the only project that's currently under construction. Converting an import to an export is a major undertaking. It's billions and billions of dollars. I think they have a $5 billion project ongoing there. As members of the energy community, if you wanted to do a tour, they will do tours for industry folks, and it's worth going down to see the activity that's going on there, but they're likely to be the first to be exporting LNG. I think yesterday we had that guesstimate on 15 and 20 was about 5, so that looks to be a pretty good number. We talked yesterday too about the relationship now between natural gas and crude oil, wet gas. Dr. Tinker said they use 1,100 BTU as their threshold. Ponderosa Advisors uses 1.3 GPM, which is gallons per million, and that's gallons of ethane, propane, and butane, natural gasoline. Looking at that, using that as the definition, we've gone from about 50% of our production to 38% coming from dry gas, and this is the wet gas line. So we're seeing a marked increase. Most of the increase that we're getting has been pretty stable on the dry gas front and growing on the wet gas. That means that we are very much tied to liquids prices, and I hate to say disposal, but at least the demand for those liquid products. David yesterday in his presentation gave I think a very good kind of sore thumb that for every $10 a barrel increase in liquids price, we see about a 50 cent per MCF drop in break even for a gas well. So it gives you that little bit of that relationship. Looking here, I think this is kind of one of those barriers that we need to kind of face up to. It's fairly significant. This represents our U.S. refining capacity. Here is our actual production, where we are and where we're going. As you can see, by about this time next year, we're going to be reaching the limits of our ability to absorb the crude production in the U.S. This Canadian production has been committed to refineries for years, and also there is foreign owned capacity in our deck, refining deck, that they're not going to give up that position. So the imports basically blend with our current supply fairly well. We bring in on average, our average gravity is about 32 API that is imported. That goes into blend with our deck. Unfortunately, most of the production that we see increasing is coming from the Marcellus, which is dominantly very light in. And that number escapes me, but it's the lightest crude. I think it's 50 gravity. So this is our overlap. This is the piece that we've got to find a home for. And right now, I think Pioneer Gas and Enterprise both have export permits for condensate. I think we'll have to see more of those. We'll have to see that taken really offshore. The real driver, and I didn't say it, but I've got to say it, but the real driver for natural gas demand, we looked up there, we had price, we had a lot of things, but really on the demand side, it's got to be weather is king. Last year we set a new record in January of about 139 billion cubic feet a day of send out. And last year during the polar vortex, we hit 7 of our top 10 all-time send outs. So I think we've always got to look at weather, whether it's winter or summer. But also the big driver to me is, does it create jobs? Does it create payroll? And does it create taxes? Really, in looking at it on a national basis, and these are from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Stats as published by TIPRO. We've got over 1 million jobs right now as of 2013 that pay on average much better than the other sectors. They represent about, I think they support over 10 million jobs across the U.S. Those are the ancillary jobs that are not specifically defined as oil and gas. Another stat that I found very interesting looking through these is the oil industry, energy industry pays the federal government, just the federal government, $84 million a day in taxes and royalties. So, you do the math on that, there's a strong impetus to keep things going, to keep things moving. I think that the other thing that I can't stress enough that was talked about yesterday is we have private ownership of minerals and how that drives the economics. Just to do a quick kind of sore thumb on that, let's think about the Marcellus. And in 2010, if you were a royalty owner in the Marcellus, in the Utica area, you were getting a daily paycheck in your mailbox of $5.6 million. And that's just assuming that's no crude, that's no product, that's just the natural gas. That's at $4 an MCF with a 15% royalty, which a lot of those are 20 and 25% royalties now. Fast forward that to 2015. Next year, those royalty owners can expect to get a paycheck every day of $10 million in their mailbox. Pretty strong incentive to develop. And that's, if you do the math, that's $3.6 billion a year. So a very strong incentive there that we have that other countries don't. I'm not going to touch long on California. I want to be quick here, but I'm surprised. They do have the highest level of employment, 4.6%, highest job, highest salary. It represents over 4.6 of the jobs in California. On the barrier side, they've had a couple of fracking bans. Mendocino County and San Benito County all had fracking bans approved by large margins, 67% this last year in the election, even though the University of Southern California just published a study in 2013 that said developing the Monterey Shale would produce over 2.8 million jobs for the state of California. and I'm going to spend most of the rest of my 5 minutes here on Colorado. Colorado, and I think the public opinion is probably one of our biggest barriers, and Colorado got it right. Colorado this year, they stepped up, the industry did, and worked hand in glove back in 2013 with the folks at the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission, with state regulators and the communities on the emissions issue. They embraced it, they came up with a compromise, and in February of 2014, they signed into law the most stringent, I think the only, I guess it is right now, the only methane leak and VO2 emissions reduction program for producers. That paid heavily for those folks in terms of goodwill and trust, and they were able, with the help of Governor Hickenlooper, a Democrat who understands the economics, to get a referendum, an initiative off of the general ballot this year to ban fracking statewide. They were sitting with over 200,000 signatures ready to put that on the general ballot. He pulled it off, signed an executive order forming an oil and gas task force. That oil and gas task force was open to nominations. They did a great job picking industry, community, government, regulatory, everybody, all the stakeholders. Agriculture has a place at that table. They're going to provide a report to the governor and the state in February of 2015. It's going to set the groundwork for developing a compromise on how oil and gas properties will be developed in the future. I think, again, if there's a best practice, the folks in Colorado got it right. It's a great collaborative, and it's great work. And with that, I'm just going to, I'll slip through. On the public opinion side, I had to throw this up because I picked it up. UT Austin did an energy survey the week before the election. I found it kind of interesting that we had quite a range from the 35-year-old and younger and 65-year-old and older. 68% would vote for candidates that support carbon emissions. 50% here would. But here's the big one, 56% are willing to pay much higher prices to protect the environment, while only 20% are willing to pay much higher prices. As you can see, you get 72% for subsidies for renewables, and 58%. And this one was an interesting one. 39% are familiar with fracking, 52% are familiar with fracking, 37% support the use of fracking, and 52% support fracking. Very interesting numbers, and that report is out there. You can find it on the web. In closing, I appreciate again the opportunity to be here. I think I agree with Kitty that education is the key to building a foundation for public engagement and creating the participants for what Dr. Tinker said was the radical middle. We've got to have more discussion in the radical middle. I think it's imperative on our industry, and that's the infrastructure side of this, that we have a safe operating system. Our logistics have to be almost as good, in my opinion, as the airlines. We can't stand to have events, pipeline ruptures, spills, rail car explosions, and water contamination issues. We've got to put an end to it if we can. I know that it's all mechanical. We're going to have failures. But building that public confidence and that public trust is imperative for us to meet the challenges of the future. And with that, I'd ask each of you to think about your opportunity you have to be an advocate for our industry, making sure that your family, your friends, your employees, your neighbors, and your business associates all understand the role that we play in continuing to provide a clean, reliable, and affordable energy supply, as well as a great standard of living here. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today.